Thank you, Christina. Thank all of you for coming, especially with this stormy weather. And to those watching the live stream, welcome. I hope things are well wherever you are watching from. Well, today I'd like to share why we need bug watchers, why that's more important than ever, in fact. Talk a little bit about the rewards of bug watching, because some of you, I'm sure, may need convincing of that. And then I'll address insect decline, some of the reasons for that, and then I'll leave you with steps you can take to help ameliorate that problem. But before that, I want to start off with the one golden rule of bug watching, and that is that it's for everybody. These fine people are friends and colleagues of mine who I invited to share their stories in the book. That was, in fact, maybe the most gratifying part of writing this book, is giving others an opportunity to voice their stories. You know, how they became bug watchers, what challenges they face in being a bug watcher, you know, that kind of thing. And these people are from all walks of life, you know, every kind of demographic you can imagine. And we need more of that, but we face challenges in doing that. And for example, not everyone can afford to do this kind of thing. How many of you, by the way, identify as birders or bird watchers? Okay, there's a few of you in here. Well, we face the same kind of thing in birding and in other natural history, recreation endeavors, and community science too, in that some people can't afford the equipment for it. So there's, you know, financial gatekeeping in that way. There are people who are disabled, and bearing in mind that not every disability is visible either. And we're not, you know, are we accommodating those people and in inviting them into the sphere of whatever natural history pursuit we have? There are challenges in recruiting youth to to entomology and birding and other endeavors, and so we need to find ways of making that more hospitable to young people. I want to highlight the Audubon of Kansas here, the bottom center photo. They do these things called adventure packs, where they fill a backpack with field guides, binoculars, hand lenses, you know, other kinds of equipment and supplies. And then they put these adventure packs in public libraries. So you can go and check out an adventure pack, go on your adventure, and then bring it back for the next person to use. That's the kind of thing we need to do, especially to address the financial gatekeeping of people who can't afford their own equipment. But you can likewise donate your gently used equipment to such organizations. 4-H is still probably the leader in getting young people interested in entomology. It's mostly, of course, focused on the agricultural entomology, which is understandable, but it's a great gateway to learn about the science of entomology in general. And there are organizations such as Entomologists of Color, who help give opportunities to Blacks and other people, Blacks, Indigenous, and other people of color to get into the science of entomology. So there are things out there that are helping. Okay, why do we need people to be looking at insects in the first place, other than professional entomologists? Well, there aren't that many professional entomologists, for one thing, but we have a collective lack of knowledge. We know very little about insects, actually. We know a lot about species that are pests of agriculture, that have negative impacts on public health and livestock and pets and on forests. But if it's not an economic pest, chances are we know precious little about it. And that's the overwhelming majority of insects that are not problematic. There's relatively little field work going on. So people are mostly in laboratories, museums, that kind of a setting, or they're in agricultural fields and forests. There's increasingly decreased funding for this kind of research as well. And so citizen scientists and community scientists are having to fill those gaps or augment existing research. In this age, there's also a large amount of misinformation getting out there. So we need people to counteract that, especially on social media. And of course, insects are declining both in abundance, certainly, and in diversity in some cases as well, though that's not a necessarily widespread phenomenon. Basically, insects need advocates. So what are some of the rewards you get out of bug watching? Well, they're very similar to what you get from birding. Beauty. Insects are really beautiful. I mean, I think most people recognize butterflies as very beautiful insects. Some people, I think, may consider them honorary birds rather than insects because they're so different from other insects. But moths, their counterpart, also have a subtle beauty. And there's far more moths than there are butterflies. And some of them are not so subtle. I mean, gold and pink, are you kidding me? Yeah. Very beautiful insects that are arguably more common than butterflies as well. And some of them are day active like butterflies. And so you can find species like this, mournful Thyris, by day. Beetles are maybe the most diverse of all living things. I think 1 out of every 4 or 5 species is a beetle, and that includes plants. And some of them are very colorful, like this metallic wood-boring beetle. She's laying eggs in this log, and her larva will bore and feed inside this in this log. Tiger beetles are very charismatic insects. They're about half an inch long, maybe a little less than that, but they're very colorful, as you can see, and they're predatory on other insects. And you typically find these in early spring and late fall in sandy areas, but there are some species like the 6-spotted tiger beetle in the bottom left here running around on woodland paths. And so they run, stop. If you startle them, they fly a short distance and then start running again. So they're a challenge to get a good look at. But if you have close focusing binoculars, that's a great way to spot them. Sometimes beauty comes in unexpected places. This is the face of a female horsefly. And of course, you do not want to get mesmerized because they can inflict a really painful bite. They're not like mosquitoes that poke you with a little proboscis. These things slice you up and then lap up your blood. So no fun. But they have these exotic eyes, these psychedelic eyes. Now, deer flies have spots rather than stripes on their eyes, but they're often these brilliant colors, and that's only in the living specimen. So if you find a dead horsefly, it's not going to have these vibrant colors like this one. Insects lend themselves to all your senses, by the way, especially visually, but also in the auditory realm of things. And okay, I know it's hard to compare the wonderful melodious twitter of a warbler to the of a cicada. But turns out it serves the same purpose. It attracts the opposite sex. So you can't argue with the functionality, at least, of it. If you've ever been close to one of these big cicadas when they let go, you could be deaf and you could still feel it. I mean, I've been point blank at one of these big cicadas, and it's a penetrating sound. It's so amazing that a small insect like this can create such a huge volume. But I think we all agree that our summer nights are made better by the serenade of crickets and katydids. And in fact, Nathaniel Hawthorne wrote of the choruses of tree crickets, he said, quote, "If moonlight could be heard, it would sound like that." And I think that's a really appropriate way to describe the songs of tree crickets. Diversity. You cannot get bored looking at insects. There are several orders of magnitude greater in diversity than any other living thing. I chose leafhoppers as an example of this because they're very common. There's 3,000 North American species, roughly, that we're aware of. And they're likewise very colorful, as you can see. I'll now go ahead and show you all 3,000 species. But, but yeah, they're very abundant. You could turn your porch light on tonight, and I guarantee you would have some leafhoppers flying to it. If you're in a grassy situation or a prairie area, you're going to have even more. Some of them are very, very tiny, like 2 or 3 millimeters. But you can tell because some of them on here have landed on our sheet that we use to blacklight for moths. And you can see by the weave that these things are really tiny. But look how amazingly colorful they are. Very diverse insect. Another reward of bug watching is just sheer drama. You don't need to go to the Amazon or the Serengeti to see really cool stuff happen. Here we have a pair of male flame skimmer dragonflies that are fighting over a prime perch along a stream in Colorado. This was purely by accident. I was shooting at one of them when the other one came along and dislodged it. So territoriality is one form of drama in the insect world. And sometimes that comes up in really greater proportion. Have you ever seen piles of ants on the edge of the sidewalk or sometimes in the middle of the sidewalk and wondered what the heck was going on? Well, it's a territorial battle of 2 colonies of immigrant pavement ants. This is a non-native species that's now established widely around the US. And so the astonishing thing about this is that there's few, if any, casualties. This is just a ritualistic battle where 2 colonies are sizing each other up to determine who has the greater number and is thus entitled to the disputed territory. And so we know how these things get started when a couple of scouts from each colony cross paths at the territorial boundary and then recruit their nest mates to come join them. But we don't have any idea how this ends. I mean, because this battle can last for hours, but dissipate in 30 minutes, and nobody knows what triggers that. I couldn't believe that's not known, but there's a mystery for you to solve if you have the patience for it. Many insects engage in courtship displays that are very, very visual, or in the case of nighttime insects, auditory maybe. Here we have a male robber fly hovering in front of a female, and he's showing off his fancy feet on his front and middle legs there, and he's got some floofy stuff on his waistcoat there, I guess. And he's like, "Look at me, I'm the best thing to come along in ages." And she's like, "Oh, bug off, I'm having lunch." And then if there is a successful courtship, of course, then mating happens. And if insects are great at one thing, it's making more insects. And so these are the typical configurations insects mate in. Usually it's the male on top of the female, like the grasshoppers there on the left. But in the case of true bugs and butterflies, they mate rear to rear. Now, who takes the lead when they're moving around, I'm not sure. Grooming is an essential aspect of insect behavior because when you're vulnerable to predators and things, you need to keep all your sensory appendages in tip-top shape and all your locomotory appendages, like your wings and your legs, in top shape too. And it's one of the few times when an insect will sit still for you and give you a chance to observe it more closely. So the edges of fields and where you have, like maybe the edge of your yard where your broadleaf plants are exposed there is a good place to watch for insects grooming themselves. The fly on the left, by the way, is grooming his eyes with his hind legs. Okay, now, unless you're a member of Cirque du Soleil, don't try this at home. If you're really lucky, you get to witness something like this, which this happened on our front porch. And so I watched this blue mud dauber intentionally land on this spider web and then vibrate her wings to shake the web to mimic something tangled in the web. And so the spider comes down thinking it's going to get a meal. The wasp stings it into permanent paralysis. And after the last photo on the bottom right there, she's going to take that spider back to her nest, which is a mud cell, pack it in there with a bunch of other paralyzed spiders, lay an egg, and then repeat the process over. So hunting can be a really amazing aspect of insect behavior if you get a chance to witness it. Insects, of course, have an exoskeleton that's inflexible. Even those of caterpillars are, while they're bendable, they're not expandable. And so for an insect to grow, it has to shed that former exoskeleton, and in the brief interval before the new exoskeleton hardens, that's when they grow. So the insect growth comes in little fits and starts like that. And it's also a time when an insect can graduate from one life stage to another, right? So here we have a cicada emerging as an adult insect from its larval, or in this case, nymphal former self. And it takes a while for the pigments to harden or the pigments to express themselves, and for the new exoskeleton to harden. Migrations are another amazing aspect of insect behavior, and most of us are familiar with the annual migration of monarch butterflies, both coming from the south in the spring and then going back to the south from the north in the fall. That's happening right now, actually. But it turns out other insects migrate too, and it's not necessarily annually. It's not obligatory. It may be opportunistically. So, for example, the painted lady butterfly in the top right there migrates only when populations build to a point where they need to literally find greener pastures for their caterpillars to feed. It turns out that dragonflies are also migratory, at least some species, but the reasoning for that is still kind of debatable. We're just now beginning to get data on that kind of thing. And the same holds true for the large milkweed bug in the bottom right there, and for certain hoverflies that feed on aphids, by the way, in their larval stage in the center there, center right, center bottom. Swarms tend to be something that frightens most people. And understandably, when you're confronted with large numbers of anything, it can be a bit intimidating, but swarms are generally a very benign phenomenon. For example, honeybee swarms happen when a new queen from an existing colony takes off with about half of that colony to go make another colony. And so when they're swarming, they're bivouacking like this on branches. They're sending scouts out from this mass to try and find a permanent home. And because they do not have helpless eggs, larvae, and pupae in a nest, there's nothing to defend. So they're very placid animals at this point. You can walk right close to a honeybee swarm with impunity when they're in a situation like this. You can't do that with a nest. Then they would behave defensively, understandably. Midges in the top right photo are often mistaken for mosquitoes because they're very similar in appearance, but they don't bite. And it's the males that form these big swarms to attract females. They typically do this over some prominent object in the landscape. And if you're the tallest thing in the landscape, they'll do it over you. But it's completely innocuous. It's just there to attract mates. Mosquitoes don't do that kind of thing, or they do so in very small swarms. Ants and termites are liberating a new generation of queens and males which can fly, and they do that in synchrony with neighboring colonies so that there's opportunity for genetic exchange, and you're not inbreeding that way. And so that typically happens at least once a year for ants and termites. Lady beetles, especially out west, in the arid west, will migrate vertically from the lowlands in the summer up into the mountains because aphids are no longer present in the lowlands during the summer. And then they come back down in the fall when aphids again present themselves. And they'll gather in these big, huge masses up in the mountains when that happens. Insects sleep. Who knew, right? And among the easiest sleeping insects to observe are solitary wasps and bees. And this is often also a male behavior where they're exposed, because female solitary wasps and bees may sleep inside their nest burrows or their nests instead of being exposed like this. But they typically adopt this strange posture where they're gripping some piece of vegetation in their jaws and then propping up their bodies. So it's very easy to tell when one of these things is sleeping. They're also very easy to approach without fear of being stung. And male bees and wasps do not sting anyway, by the way. The cuckoo bee on the right there is just hanging by that piece of vegetation by her jaws alone. I mean, can you imagine going to bed and thinking, I think I'll just grip the chandelier in my jaws and the yeah. Sometimes they sleep in large groups. And again, this is typically a male behavior. The females are elsewhere. And why they do this is again, up for debate. It may be to magnify their warning colors, because usually black and yellow, black and white, black and red means I can defend myself either by stinging you or I taste really bad. So it's obviously it's easy to spot these congregations of insects, and they often happen in your yard or garden. Insects are cold-blooded, so they have to adjust their body temperature through behaviors. And in the morning or when it's cool, they typically will bask. And here we have a grasshopper that is tilting his body towards to get the most rays of the sun, and he's dropping that hind leg, so it's his body getting all that. And maybe you'll see butterflies that are tipped over, and they're doing the same thing. They're basking. Some butterflies bask with their wings open. That helps them warm up. But they can get too hot too, and so they have to have other behaviors to deal with that. And here we have a grasshopper sitting on a little, well, that's a boulder to the grasshopper, right? On top of these pebbles that are even hotter still. He's drooping his abdomen, so he's not getting a lot of incoming sunlight that way. And he's up on his tiptoes, so he's not scorching his belly on that rock that he's sitting on. The dragonfly on the right is doing what we call obelisking. So he's pointing his abdomen straight up in the air, again, to minimize the amount of solar radiation reaching at his body, and he can therefore go on with his behaviors during the heat of the day. One of the best rewards of bug watching is just discovery. Seeing something new to you is always exciting. It is for me anyway, seeing something I haven't seen before. But this is a really interesting story. This looks like a drab little moth. And so when we lived in Colorado Springs, I would walk our neighborhood pretty much daily. And so one time in late November, I was walking past this vacant lot. I had done so many times before. And I noticed these little tiny moths, maybe a wingspan of a half an inch or so, flying around in the weeds. And they weren't very easy to approach, and they'd quickly disappear with their camouflage once they stopped flying. But finally, one of them landed on the sidewalk, and I got a picture of it. And I didn't know what it was. I thought I might know the family level of classification for it. So I put it up on iNaturalist, which I'll talk about in a moment. And there it sat. I thought, oh, somebody is going to recognize this thing. It's really common. And, no. And so fast forward to November of last year, and I get an email from this person and colleagues that he works with studying moths and butterflies in Colorado. And he said, we noticed your spotting on iNaturalist. It turns out it's new to science. So meet Coloradactria frigida, one of the newest moths on the planet. The paper came out last month, and so I couldn't even talk about it until now. I mean, that's just good etiquette, honestly. And he said, oh, the kicker is that it's so weird that we have to give it a new genus. And so now I'm passed out on the floor, because that really is a big deal. Finding a new species really in the insect realm is your chances of that are greater than winning the lottery. But to have a new genus is pretty spectacular. And so it turns out that the other places in Colorado this was found, they determined its host plant is a plant called sand dropseed. And it typically colonizes vacant lots and weedy fields and things. But not only that, but for the moths to succeed, that plant has to be either mowed or trampled. I mean, it's like, so upright plant, no moths, completely mangled plant. Oh yeah. It's like, I think the prevailing theory right now is that this moth evolved in places that got trampled by bison herds. And because of the distribution of the plant, we expect it'll be found in Wyoming and maybe northern New Mexico, as well as along the Front Ranges in Colorado. And this is what the female looks like, by the way. She has these really short wings. She can't fly, so she sends out a sex scent called a pheromone to attract the males to her. But this just goes to show you can't assume anything in entomology. Something you assume is, oh, everybody knows that. No, it may turn out to be something completely new. And that's why you need to share your observations. And this is where your online platforms and your phone apps come into play. So iNaturalist is probably the most popular right now. You can get it on your phone and on the web for free. You just register, make an account, and then upload either images or audio files. There's not a video option at the moment. I'm thinking that's probably coming. And then it makes it available to the scientific community and to other people who have an interest in such things and want to know what lives around them or what lives in the destination they're going for vacation, that kind of thing. That's what we do a lot anyway. And Project NOAA is very similar to iNaturalist, but you can't upload large batches of observations at once like you can with iNaturalist. Project NOAA is often more kid-friendly though. Bugguide.net is the premier database for North American terrestrial arthropods. So that's insects, spiders, scorpions, and the like, millipedes, centipedes, roly-polies, freshwater crustaceans. They're all under the umbrella for Bugguide. And there's still a lot of gaps on that site that need filling as well. There are other groups other platforms that are more specific. So if you're interested in moths, you can go to the North American Moth Photographers Group site and put your observations in there. Or if you like dragonflies and damselflies, Odonata Central is the place to go for that. And if you want to just explore opportunities in community science, SciStarter is a good place to go. It's kind of a clearinghouse for community science projects of all kinds. And don't forget social media, because this is how you recruit other people to get interested in this kind of thing too. So if you've got an Instagram or a Facebook or a YouTube channel, or you're on TikTok or Blue Sky or a photo sharing website like Flickr, put your stuff up there. And I've had publishers and academics come to me from my Flickr site wanting to use my photos. So that's another reason to get your stuff up there as well. Well, back in the day when I was a kid, I had to do bug watching all by myself. And that was okay. And some people still prefer to do it that way. But nowadays, you can share that experience with other people and learn from them and share your own stories with them. And the photo here is from the biggest week in American birding up at McGee Marsh in Northwest Ohio. If you're interested in birds, I highly recommend this event. It usually is around the first week of May, if memory serves. And if you can tolerate crowds, because it is crowded, but I found everybody to be very polite, and it's a great chance to see warblers 3 feet away, that kind of thing. Very exciting. But bug watching has a long way to go to catch up to that kind of an audience, unfortunately, but I'm going to make it happen. Heidi and I had the opportunity to go on an ode blitz on the Gila River in New Mexico looking for damselflies and dragonflies in a place that has been under observed. And so it doesn't get any better than this. I mean, you're in this beautiful scenic landscape near the Gila Cliff Dwellings National Monument, wading in rivers with like-minded people. It's really a great experience. And when we lived in Colorado, we were members of the Mile High Bug Club. It's not what you think. And so one of the annual events we had was a grasshopper hunt on this 80,000 acre ranch out on the high plains, south of Colorado Springs, north of Pueblo. And in one outing, we discovered 40 species of grasshoppers in one day. I mean, that's a testament to both the diversity of grasshoppers and to the habitat quality on this ranch. There were many little different habitats in this ranch, from sand hills to wetlands. And so there was a great diversity of creatures. There are also national and international events you can participate in. One of these just concluded. That's National Moth Week. It ran this year from July 19th to the 27th. It's typically near the end of July each year. And you can to participate, you can just turn on your own porch light if you want and see what flies in, and then record that and put it up on iNaturalist. Or you can go to a public event, which typically involves hanging a sheet or some other reflective material and suspending a black light in front of that, and then shining some white lights on it as well. And that will attract moths and other insects that you can record. The City Nature Challenge is another big one. That happens usually at the end of April each year. And there is a project specifically for the Kansas City metro area, but it's become a global event now that started with a friendly competition between the cities of Los Angeles and San Francisco. And so they wanted to see how many people can we get out there looking at all kinds of different organisms, because it's not just insects. How many species can we record? And so it's turned out into this global thing now, and people have discovered new species as a result of that as well. A BioBlitz is typically a timed event of 24 hours at a very specific location. That definition has changed a little bit, because now with climate change, we're wanting to know how things change over time. So the BioBlitz could be the initial event, but that window still remains open for you to make observations at that same location at any time. Well, this is the sad part of the talk. Insects, I think there's general consensus now that insects are in decline, but as I mentioned previously, it's not necessarily the same everywhere. So there's some locations where it's very obvious, and there's other locations where it's like, well, we're seeing not much of a change at all. But we have enough knowledge to know we should act like it's a disaster and stave off further declines. So what are some of the reasons for this? Well, the overarching one, of course, is climate change. And that's triggered in part by deforestation or habitat destruction in general. And that habitat destruction often happens to make way for a greater scale of agriculture. The scale and intensity of agriculture is greater than we can sustain, in my opinion. It forces us, because of acre upon acre of croplands, it forces us to use pesticides because we don't have adjacent reservoirs of natural controls like predatory insects, birds, other things that are going to be controlling those pests. So we have to rely on chemicals. What we do in agriculture is mirrored by what we do in urban systems. We have acres and acres of lawn. I call it lawnscapes. And so how do we keep pests down on our lawns? We spray chemicals on them. We have pollution as a result of those applications of chemicals that includes fertilizers as well. And we have invasive species because we covet exotic plants, especially from other countries. And we forget that sometimes hitchhiking on those plants are things that could become problematic here if they escape. So spotted lanternfly is the kind of thing we get as a result of our global commerce. I want to highlight light pollution as an underappreciated problem. And you don't have to live in a city for this to be an issue. Just the sky glow from a distant metropolis can negatively impact organisms in rural areas as well. And so it extends the period of activity for day active insects, and it definitely impairs the behaviors of insects that are nocturnal. And that also applies to other organisms like bats. And it exposes nocturnal insects to more predation than they would normally in a dark area. So thankfully, there are now dark sky initiatives that cities are starting to pay attention to, changing their mode of lighting so that you don't have a lot of upward projecting lighting, and it's concentrated only in areas where it's needed, motion sensor lights, that kind of thing. But even light coming out of your house at night, if you don't have really good blinds or curtains, can still affect organisms outside your house. Okay, so what are some ways that we can address this? What's the best way? Is it joining a conservation organization like Audubon or the National Wildlife Federation or the Nature Conservancy, or donating to those things? Yeah, that definitely helps. I mean, these organizations are doing very good work, sometimes globally. The Xerces Society was the original organization that focused exclusively on conservation of invertebrate animals. And it started with butterflies. It's named after the Xerces blue, which is now extinct. It's the only butterfly we know of that has been rendered extinct by human causes. Yeah, those organizations do very good work. If you have the opportunity to plant a pollinator garden or landscape with native plants, if you have that luxury of having a home where you can do that, yeah, that definitely helps. I mean, we're in our infancy in learning how to do that. And often you get conflicting advice on things like, how do I kill my lawn? Do I apply a one-time application of a chemical? Do I suffocate it with cardboard and mulch? Or, we're still learning about, it's not a one-size-fits-all no mow May. I mean, it's a nice, catchy little thing, but it's more nuanced than that. So if you can wade through the conflicting advice and do something like that, yeah, that's very helpful. But there's one way that can trump all of these, and that's to stop consuming everything but my books. And of course, I'm kidding in the grand scheme of things. We have to eat, we need to fuel our vehicles, that kind of thing. But what I'm asking is to be more mindful of your choices in the marketplace. We pay a lot of attention to our votes at the ballot box. Our votes in the marketplace are way more important. Okay, so and I'm guilty as the next guy, right? I mean, I like my cookies and chips as much as the next guy, and I eat bananas and I drink coffee during the colder months anyway. But when I think about it, I'm thinking, okay, does my eating bananas mean somebody in that country is not feeding themselves? Is the coffee plantation taking over habitat where tigers used to be? So I'm having to rethink my choices based on those kinds of conflicts and act accordingly. I mean, I try and buy things that are, like rainforest certified coffee, that kind of thing, or bird friendly coffee that is grown in a manner that still allows for coexistence with other organisms and still allows the indigenous populations of people there to earn a decent living. So these are the kinds of memes I want to see more of, actually. You're not going to find the regal fritillary, which is a very iconic butterfly the size of a monarch in our prairies here in Kansas and Missouri. You're not going to find that in a cornfield or a soybean field or a wheat field, because this butterfly's caterpillar feeds on violets, and weeds aren't tolerated in these large agricultural systems. You might find the butterfly in a very well-managed rangeland or pasture for cattle. I've seen that. But these are the kinds of things we have to start thinking about. And so I encourage you to do that. And so as mentioned previously, these are the books I have available. I only have 3 copies of Wasps. I apologize for that. But obviously, you're not obligated to buy anything. With that, I want to thank you again for coming. I want to thank Christina. Thanks for the logistics on this. The Erics, thank you for running such a wonderful facility. That's a hub for the community. It's a place to learn informally. It's an underappreciated resource, if you ask me. Heidi, my partner, thank you for putting up with me while I put together these presentations. My publisher, Princeton University Press, if you think about buying later, you can use the code ERE30. That's ERE30 for a 30% discount off of any of my titles. My mentors, past, present, and future, I didn't learn what I shared with you just now all by myself. I've had the privilege of having the wisdom of people older, younger than myself, who know far more about specific subjects. And again, all of you here and online, thank you.
Just this. Okay, we have some time for some questions. So if you have a question, raise your hand and I'll come around so those watching virtually can hear as well.
You talk about bugs sleeping at night. Do all bugs sleep or just the one you specify?
The question is, do all bugs sleep? I have a colleague who has investigated that, and he could tell you a lot more than I could about that. Social insects definitely sleep. And he's measured periods of inactivity in honeybees, I know for sure. His name is Barrett Klein. And I'm trying to remember if he's written a book about that. I don't think so. But he's got papers out there on insect sleep. So I apologize, I can't be more specific. But I know, well, tiger beetles, we talked about tiger beetles earlier. They definitely sleep. They dig themselves into the sand in short little burrows where they spend the night. So yeah, it's a pretty widespread phenomenon.
Right here in the back.
Thank you. Bugs / insects, is there a difference? And why do moths go to light? Thank you.
Okay, a couple of questions there. The difference between bugs and insects. The formal difference between bugs and insects is that there is a order of insects called true bugs, and they have piercing, sucking mouth parts exclusively. There are other insects that have those mouth parts, but they have it exclusively. And they're a subset of insects. So all bugs are insects, but not all insects are bugs. The other question was, how come moths are attracted to light? Well, they're not really. It turns out they're disoriented by it. And so that again goes to light pollution. So this is a really recent finding actually, is that there's parts of the insect that orient normally to the moon and the stars. And so when they're confronted with a light elsewhere, they turn into that pretty much involuntarily. It's a neuro mechanism that triggers that funneling into an artificial light source. So it's normally a means of navigation that gets corrupted by artificial light.
And staying back here on your left.
Thank you, sir. I'm going to give you two questions. One, why is it I'm not seeing fireflies anymore? Number two, what would you might call bellwether insect species that maybe we should be looking out for?
Okay, the first question, why are we not seeing as many fireflies anymore? Well, again, part of it is light pollution, part of it is habitat destruction. The greatest diversity of fireflies you find in wetlands. Many of them are snail predators in the larval stage. There's others that hunt earthworms, and there are others that are more generalist predators. So, if you're trying to control your snails and things in your yard, that could be depriving them of food. As adults, they don't really feed much, if at all. And then, again, light pollution makes it difficult. But so there's a few fireflies that are really common no matter what, it seems like. So like the common eastern firefly, Photinus pyralis, is the one that's over your lawn. And when they flash, they make a J-shaped flash. That's how to identify them. But there's other fireflies that are up in the treetops, and there's others that again are very dependent on very specific qualities that are not widespread in the habitat. Your other question: are there any other bellwether insects that we should be looking at, like the canary in the coal mine? I'm assuming you mean. I would say no. And part of the reason I say that is because I look at the monarch butterfly that is sucking all this funding into one species. We need to be concentrating on ecosystem level things. So that's what we want to be doing. When you landscape your yard with native plants, it's not so that you can have your own private zoo, free range zoo of things that are your favorites. Okay, the goal is to have as much of an intact ecosystem as you can. In our yard in Leavenworth, we've documented over 1,600 species of things that are either in our yard or that flew over, if you include birds. Well, actually, if you include plants, we're over 1,700 now. And that's just with a little looking. We haven't even really done a lot of work to get native plants in. We have done some. But that goes to show you that it doesn't take much to increase biodiversity, and that's what we want.
Up front?
I have a recommendation and a question. The recommendation is anybody who has Passport on KCPT, they have a series out there called Bugs Rule. It's a 4-part series that I'd recommend. It's kind of hidden. You have to look for it. And then my question is, when you talk about agriculture and the use of pesticides, and we're kind of in a conundrum, I think, because in the 1940s, when Truman was president, he gave a speech at the United Nations talking about they thought we were headed for a famine because we were running out of land. Well, industrialized farming saved us, so we can now feed 8 billion people. And I recommend going natural as much as possible, but I think we also have to get our population down.
Okay, can I address that, please? Okay. All right, I'm definitely pro-agriculture. I hope that, maybe I should say my views reflect myself and not the institution I'm speaking at. But what we're doing now is we're not feeding people, we're feeding corporations. And think about how we're using what we grow. It's going to feed livestock, is going to make processed foods, it's going into biofuels. There's only a fraction now that's actually feeding people directly. So support local agriculture. Go to your farmers markets. Make farmers feel appreciated directly whenever possible. Get them out of that necessity for falling under a corporate control where shareholders and CEOs are the ones that are profiting.
We're staying up here.
Hi, I've been a bird watch for 50 years, and so going along that, and just in these woods around here, I always see new insects. But staying on that happy note, and it's a history question more or less, and you can win me some money. But would you think insects in general, and I'll just say mosquitoes, fleas, ticks, have killed more humans than anything else?
Oh, okay. Yeah. Lice with, oh God, what is it that lice carry? Somebody had typhoid? I'm sorry?
Fleas and black bug.
Yeah. And mosquitoes, definitely. I mean, mosquitoes are becoming a renewed threat. Ticks are becoming a renewed threat, even though ticks are not insects, they bear addressing. If people knew how many things ticks and mosquitoes, how many maladies they carry, no one would go out of their house. I mean, it's truly frightening. And like with Lyme disease, that's a tick-borne bacterium, I believe, a rickettsia. Its diagnosis is incredibly problematic. I would venture to say tick bites and Lyme disease are vastly underestimated. They can cause, there's tick bites that can cause paralysis. I mean, it's just wicked how many terrible things can come out of that. So, by all means, wear repellents. And the most effective that I'm aware of have a DEET, D-E-E-T, as the 30% as their main ingredient. So, apply that to clothing, tuck your pants into your socks, wear long sleeves and things, so you minimize the ability for ticks to get into places you can't see. Inspect each other when you come home from a hike. Ticks get behind your ear, they get behind your knees, in your scalp, places you can't see that you need someone else to find for you. So excellent question. And yes, I would venture to say that as far as natural mortality goes, that is caused by other organisms, yeah, mosquitoes and during the war, lice, yeah.
Up front.
I had a question about fireflies.
Yeah.
I went to North Carolina with my family, and there were fireflies that are very, very bright compared to the ones that are here. I just wanted to know how many types of fireflies there are in America.
Oh, wow, that's an excellent question. How many fireflies are there in North America? And did you see the synchronous blinking ones there in North Carolina? Okay, yeah, there's in the Smoky Mountains. This points out another reason we need to get all voices in the conversation, because there was a long history of people claiming that there were synchronous blinking fireflies in the Smoky Mountains, and nobody believed them. And now we found out not only is it true, it's a huge tourist attraction. So you have to get in a lottery now to go see this phenomenon. But people, the locals all knew about this a long time ago, but because they're hillbillies, nobody listened to them. Well, that goes to show why we need to. As far as how many species there are, I honestly don't know. I'd say upwards of 30 for sure. And they're often very localized. So there's some that are only found in places in Florida, for example, others that are only in North Carolina, as you mentioned, and then there's the more widespread ones. There is a field guide to fireflies. Lynn Faust is the author of that. And there's another book called Silent Sparks that I would recommend as well. So those are good resources.
On your left over here.
What's the difference between a moth and a butterfly? And another question, what is an informal way to say arthropod?
Oh, wow. That's brilliant. Okay, so difference between moth and butterfly, there are no differences that don't have an exception. So, not all moths have the feathery antenna, for example. Moths can change the way their resting posture. They can have their wings widespread. They can have them folded over their back. They can roll their wings under them in some cases. So you can't tell by the wing posture. Many moths are day active, so it's not a matter of when they're active. There's some butterflies that are active at night even. So the real way to tell is usually how the wings are connected to each other. They have two sets of wings. Front pair and back pair are connected in moths, not connected in butterflies. But there's one kind of moth that where they're not connected either. So there's no real way. We'd be better off calling everything a moth than trying to make a distinction, honestly. And your question, what is a better name than arthropod that still describes what an arthropod is? That is a real challenging question. Because the meaning of arthropod means joint-footed. So that refers to the articulation of the exoskeleton. And that applies to crustaceans, obviously, as well as insects and spiders and things. I would like to post that on social media. I really would, because I think you make an excellent point.
Like specifically spiders and arachnids and insects, not crustaceans.
Okay.
Like specifically those two.
Okay. Well, that's an artificial category then, and I can't address that to you because arthropods include everything I just mentioned. So that's a little problematic, but I get what you're getting at, and I think it's worth exploring.
We're going to stick around over here on your left.
Hello, this is a more lighthearted question. You mentioned that you find some insects be especially charismatic, which I agree, and I say that all the time in some of the hikes I lead. I find the milkweed beetle to be, or sorry, the milkweed bug to be especially charismatic. So I want to know, what are some other charismatic insects that you've come across?
Oh, gall. It's always the one you haven't seen yet. It's what are some charismatic insects is the question. Oh, it's so frustrating because I love cottonwood borers, these big black and white zebra striped things, and they kind of seem to be most common in Oklahoma and parts of Texas, but they are here in this area. But it never fails that somebody will, there's lots of interest groups on insects on Facebook and what have you. And so I look at those all the time, and somebody has posted one of these things from their barbecue. I was like, oh, what's this thing? He's just going to go back to his barbecue after he's not fully appreciating how cool this is. But yeah, a lot of the beetles fit the charismatic category. There's some really beautiful big metallic ones, and then there's the eyed click beetles. If you've ever seen, they're bullet shaped. They're about yay big, and they have these two big black eye spots on them. They're really cool. But but I guess part of what makes things charismatic is do you find them all the time or not? And so if it's something you don't see all the time, it's even more. Yeah.
All right, back here on your left.
I have a black swallowtail caterpillar on my dillweed in the community garden. I read that it takes up to 30 days of eating and then another 10 or 15 to become the pupa or whatever, and then it may overwinter. And we have to clear out the community garden every fall. Do I find a pupa and save it some way?
Yeah, you could. You could overwinter the pupa of the butterfly in your garage or someplace. That's a really good question. If you want to rear insects, I recommend doing it in a place where they're still getting the, even if they are in an inert stage like the pupa, they need to get the natural cycle of light and dark. Temperature is sometimes an issue, but it's more of they need to get that cycle of light and dark so that they're not hatching in the middle of winter. And so your garage or shed where the temperature's relatively similar to what's outdoors is a good way to do that, but make sure there's a window in that building then. But yeah, thank you for your concern.
All right, we've come up to the top of the hour, so let's end with a couple of virtual questions. What is a technological invention that was inspired by an insect that you think is very cool?
Oh boy.
Purple. Seriously.
Purple?
Yeah, purple was the royal color that they could get. There's an insect that I'm talking about that they could get purple dye off.
Oh,
That's why
okay.
all the kings and royalty with. Maybe I should shut up.
No, I like that this is a two-way conversation, honestly. And I look forward to hearing your stories once we're concluded here. Well, one that's of particular interest to me, I grew up in Portland, Oregon. And so one story I heard, which is true, is that the chain on a chainsaw was for a long time very inefficient. It was just like, the teeth were all in alignment, and so it would take a long time, even with a chainsaw, to cut through a branch. Well, this one guy found these large larvae of a wood-boring beetle gnawing through wood very effectively, and so with its opposable mandibles was able to chew through wood at a pretty good clip there. And so he designed a new saw chain with alternating opposable teeth, and that launched what we now use for our chainsaws, and it got him a business that's now a multinational corporation. So it all started by observing this larval wood borer chewing through a log. So I think that's pretty amazing. And I have another friend who is in the midst of patenting a new kind of insulation that was inspired by the architecture of yellow jacket nests. So that's going along pretty good. I can't say more about it, but yeah. So there's always things being invented from insects for sure.
Fascinating. We've got one more question. This is the one we'll end on. How do you convince people to give up on lawns? Should cities reward people who do?
Good question. I mean, I think lawns have their place in they're certainly necessary for ball fields. And if you have concerts in a park or something, it's great to have a lawn for people to spread out on. If you have kids at home and you want to keep them, within eyesight or earshot, having a lawn is perfectly acceptable in my opinion. But if it's these great wasted spaces like in Leavenworth, like the VA, that there's a huge lawn there for no apparent reason, and there's roadsides that are mowed way beyond what they probably should be. So yeah, I think some lawns have their places. Their relaxing weed ordinances would go a long way, I think, to helping people. If you don't want to get a code violation, and so I think relaxing some of those weed codes would be helpful in getting people to start using native vegetation. But it's catching on enough that I think that's going to happen. I really do.
Okay, thank you so much, Eric. Thank you. Yep, thank you for the amazing talk, and thank you all for joining us this morning. For more information about all of our upcoming programs and events, visit lindahall.org. Enjoy the rest of your weekend. Turn our stuff off here.
Yeah.